Hi there, today on Typical Books we'll be talking about some of the books I've been reading lately and why I'm not buying a heck of a lot of books right now. I'm sure a lot of people aren't buying a lot of books right now. I mean, there's a meme probably somewhere that's like, buying books in this economy. That's not the reason that I'm not buying a lot of books. But if you recall, like a month or two ago, I had a video called Book Buying Boom, and I bought a lot of books. I had too many books. And at that time I had said, maybe I'm going to take a little break on buying books because I've got the backwards shelf here that I've still been adding to as I buy books. I didn't add every single book I bought a month or two ago to that shelf, but I've added a few more backwards books, and I've picked some, and I have to make room for reading them. If I keep buying books, then I'll never get through all the books on my shelf that I've not read. From the backwards shelf, I'd read Pressure most recently. I'm going to be reading North American Lake Monsters by Nathan Ballingrud. Coming up next, I'm a little slow at my reading right now because I've taken a lot of e-arcs. I know I don't take unsolicited advanced reading copies, and I don't typically respond to emails for them. I usually only reviewed physical copies of books, and typically only for publishers that I have reviewed for before or authors. I do have a soft spot for Canadian authors, of course, so there's always a caveat for that. But that said, this year I've been experimenting with e-arcs on mostly NetGalley and things like that from publishers I really like Clash Books. So yeah, I will be reading quite a few of those, and I'll be talking about that in a second. But for physical books, which I really do prefer, because I spend a lot of time in front of a screen. At work, I'm in front of a screen. For editing, I'm in front of a screen. For reading, sometimes I'm in front of a screen. And just for fun, because I like doing things like spreadsheets and websites and researching things online. And who doesn't spend time online? I'm in front of a screen for that too. And then we watch movies. I mean, more screens. So from the backwards books, I picked the two. I'm just taking them in order and adding to the back. And by the time I get to the back of the list, I'll have forgotten what's there. I'm not putting every book, like I said, on the backwards bookshelf. But Doors of Darkness, 27 Tales of Terror. This has a cover by Cameron Rubik, if I'm correct, and Cameron Chaney does the foreword. There's other stories in here. Tobin Elliott has a story in this book. I've been very excited to get to it for a while, and these are the only two paperbacks that were left on that shelf, so I thought I'd get to them. And Andrew Niederman's Someone's Watching. And if you recall, Andrew Niederman, who took up writing the V.C. Andrews books and wrote Pin, very interested to read other Andrew Niederman that I've never gotten to before. So that's all from the backwards bookshelf. So as I said, I've read a lot of e-arcs lately. Most recently, I finished reading two. One was 8114. The name of the book is 8114 by Joshua Hull. And he had co-written a film that we enjoyed here, Glorious. And that was a really fun, really kind of Lovecraftian, very strange vibe to that movie. And 8114 is extremely cool in its premise. There's some things about it I'll talk about in a review when I get to it, but for the highlights and the things I loved about this book and why I think you might be interested if you're interested in books about failed podcasters returning to their small town home. Now, those are two things I love: books about podcasters and books about returning to your small town after everything has fallen apart and things that continue to fall apart. It's the premise of why he was a failed podcaster, having covered somebody who went missing in his hometown as a kid that he remembered, and thinking like, oh, all these people do very well on true crime podcasts. I have an idea about this kid that went missing. And he started covering it, and it went terribly wrong. And that's not even really what the story's about. I like the way it's interwoven often in the story. And the story itself, I'll have to talk about it in a full review. But 8114 was a real trip. It was fun. The tone, if you like, super cool, sort of like if you've watched The Monkey by Stephen King, that new movie that has almost a humorous vibe, if you like that sort of attitude, you would enjoy 8114. What I like the most about 8114 is the back of the book content, where the author talks about the real house that his family lived in, that this 8114 house is based on. And he gives pictures and talks about the area. It's very cool. Another arc I just finished reading was The Cut by C.J. Dotson. And The Cut ties into another book I've read recently as well. Skull Daddy by Stephanie Ann. This is a local author to me, and this was from the backwards bookshelf too. I meant to read this in October. It is sort of a Halloween story, and I bought it in October. It was a new release last October, and it's $16.66, which caught my eye because of Satan, of course. But I don't know why it's so expensive for such a small book, but I digress. If you like books about new mothers and people with toddlers rambling around and mispronouncing things and just generally getting up to, possession hijinks and all sorts of strange crap going on, or a creature feature perhaps, you will enjoy Skull Daddy and The Cut by C.J. Dotson. These were two books I read back to back. And I don't know how I'm going to approach reviews of them because they just weren't for me, in that they're about having children and having toddlers and being pregnant, or that sort of thing. It's just not interesting to me, and it's just not my cup of tea, as people will say. But there were some interesting things in them that I think that some people who like that sort of story would get a kick out of. And this, of course, is perhaps a novelette. These two women have a toddler, and they have Halloween decorations that are from a thrift store. And in that, there is a skull, the titular Skull Daddy, and their toddler names him Skull Daddy. That's enchanting, and I like that. But then there is some typical kid tantrum stuff that I couldn't care about. But it is interesting the way that this goes. I could see this as a short story. The Cut by C.J. Dotson, there were things about that, as I'd said in the new release video, that I found compelling. She works in a hotel and she's on the run from a former fiance. And I found all of that really compelling. When somebody is on the run from a former fiance that's abusive and such, to just fall into the trap of being overly trusting of other people is a little irksome, unless it's described that that's their problem, that they're too trusting. But I don't know if all that heavy lifting was done. If you're interested in reading about toddlers in horror and not being not violence against toddlers, the toddlers sometimes being that linchpin that ties the whole plot together, then you will really like The Cut and Skull Daddy. The Cut, I think I will have some more to say about that, because it did have some interesting things about working in the hotel industry, which I was pretty familiar with from high school and college. Right now I am reading an arc of Senseless by Ronal Malfi, and I have become totally enamored with Malfi as an author. I want to find more of his books. I don't see them in thrift stores or used stores, so I don't know if it is that there's a very small fan base, or if that fan base is the sort of people that keep all of their books that they buy. I just never see Ronal Malfi books in used bookstores. If it's different for you, let me know, because I'm always curious about the landscape of used bookstores in different areas. But I'm kind of not going to rush through Senseless. I have a whole week to read it. That's plenty of time. But for Easter, I want to read She Wakes by Jack Ketchum. If you also watch Michael's Grim Reads, like I do, he's talked lots about Jack Ketchum, and there's videos about Jack Ketchum's time in Greece, which I find fascinating. You kind of assume a lot of the times that authors either write about their hometowns, like what they know, a la Stephen King, or they write about places and just sort of imagine it, or maybe use travel logs, or nowadays use Google Maps or whatever, and just sort of guess about the place. We don't really take into account that writing, much like journalism, involves actually going to places. Or you've gone to places on an extended vacation, become enamored with them, and they just get ingrained in your soul somehow. So you write about them. Jack Ketchum wrote about Greece. He doesn't write about Greece, I don't think, in any other book but this. He doesn't write about Easter in any other book, and Easter isn't really typically a horror novel thing, right? We hear there's Christmas horror, because you got to match that sort of evil of Christmas with another sort of creeping evil. There's not enough resurrection stories that take place around Easter. There is a film called The Resurrection. It's not very good. And other than that, really, I can't think of any other Easter horror. But yeah, very excited to get to this. So that's what I'll be reading for the Easter holiday. So I've been reading a lot of ebooks, and I'm tired of being in front of screens. I was very pleased to read the short story The Monkey from Stephen King's Skeleton Crew, which I've read before as a kid. I hadn't read that particular story probably since I was about 13 years old. So it was a joy to pick up a book and read an actual story. Yeah, so it was neat to see the differences and the similarities between the highly comedic and very dark and very bloody and very good film The Monkey and compare it to the original Stephen King story. If you've seen The Monkey and never read the story, I highly recommend it because it gives you a whole other look at that same story. And if you enjoyed the story, be prepared. It's going to be a little different, like what story and movie adaptation isn't, but it takes quite a different tack and it's so much more violent and terrifying. Yeah, I really enjoyed reading a little Stephen King story, just like I used to spend all my time doing as a teen. Before I talk about the 2 books that I did pick up in the past month, I've got this little witch's date book, and I typically pick up a Llewellyn date book of some sort every year to read through some of the seasonal articles that they have in there, sometimes recipes, and to use it as a planner sometimes. But I'm not a physical planner person, which is so weird because I take physical notes at work, at school, when I was a teacher. I have a notebook that I use religiously for remembering things, and I find it's very helpful to write things down, whether you refer to it or not, to get these wheels greased. Not so with tracking my books. Apparently, I've tried numerous times to have a journal or just a list, a written list. It's not working. So I thought I would try a digital tracker again. You may ask, why don't I just use Goodreads? I'm on Goodreads, quite obviously. A lot of us are. Hello. So I love Goodreads for tracking my reading challenge and for keeping track of books people have recommended to me. And why not Storygraph? I don't like Storygraph. I just don't like the vibe of Storygraph. And I don't like the vibe of Goodreads, quite honestly. So I thought, I've tried a book scorer. Merce from Harpies in the Trees had created a book scorer, which I was using to do like a rating. But then I thought, why do that if I'm not really publicizing my ratings, my star ratings for books? And then I saw this really cool tracker from Novelty Corner. If you don't follow Novelty Corner, BookTuber, go ahead. I'll leave the links down in the description as well. A new BookTuber to me. I don't think she reads a lot of horror, but I like her channel. And I really like this book tracker that she has developed in Google Sheets. And that's specifically what I was looking for because I like using Excel and Google Sheets for things. I do use Google products a lot, and I really like what you can do with a tracker like that, but I wasn't too interested in creating one of my own. So I thought, well, I'll try and find a template. And I stumbled upon a BookTuber's template. I was in heaven, right? And it was super, super in-depth. It had a lot of categories of things I don't want to track, and I can easily change it to track things and add pages if I want, and all sorts of different references, and come up with a really cool dashboard. So here is a blink of the dashboard as it is right now. And I really like having this main go-to glance at my stats for the year. It gives me a lot better stats, I think, that I want to know from Goodreads. And, I can just track things a little better. So we'll see how it goes. I use Google products on my phone, on my iPad, at work, and on my computer all the time. So I can easily get at it. There's no excuse for me to get at it. I don't need to find a pen to write down what I'm reading if I don't have a pen nearby, which was the problem with the other tracker. So I'm excited. I don't know if I'll do monthly reports like this, but we'll see at year's end. I definitely will. And let's say for Halloween. One thing I'm very interested in tracking is my buying of books, and I'm going to wiggle in there a way to track what I've read off the backwards bookshelf as well. So without further ado, I picked up some really neat books. This was a gift from my husband, and it is a numbered slipcase edition of Pieces of Madness by Casey Pierce, Source Point Press. It's a wonderful little hardcover book from an author I'd never heard of, but it was a very good price for something that is slipcased and numbered with a signature. He couldn't resist. So we'll be checking that out shortly. Had you ever read any Casey Pierce? Let me know in the comments because I've never heard of the author, but they had co-written with other authors I've heard of. So yeah, this Reassuring Tales by T.E.D. Klein is a numbered edition. I usually don't pick up special editions too often of things, but T.E.D. Klein is such a rarity, and I'm always excited to see reprints or special editions of T.E.D. Klein stuff. I really should pick up Dark Gods, because that was one of my favorite. The Ceremonies is cool too, but Dark Gods is what I was introduced to Mr. Klein with. There are beautiful illustrations and, of course, a wonderful dust cover. Dust jackets are something that I usually remove from books, but this is just too pretty to remove. The exciting thing is that it gets prettier when you remove it. Reassuring Tales, collecting a dozen stories along with verse, an essay on Arthur Machen, story notes, and an interview gathered from sources ranging from hardcover anthologies to Lovecraftian fanzines to a children's magazine. Reassuring Tales presents a striking overview of Klein's career over 6 decades. It opens with one of his most remarkable creations, inspired by the framed journal structure in Machen's The White People, in which an English instructor offers trenchant commentary on the Gothic tradition from Shakespeare to Faulkner, while increasingly uncanny and threatening events at Porth Farm take shape around him. Later expanded into the British fantasy award-winning novel The Ceremonies. The original has lost none of its power to compel and chill in the 52 years since publication. Accompanying it are a clutch of briefer stories in a variety of modes, leavened from the irony implicit in the collection's title, manifested only through the wit, but also in the tension between the stable, comfortable reality we wish to exist and the destabilizing forces laying at its fringes. Thus, the seemingly innocuous campfire tales in one-size-eats-all, and the flattering enticements of the well-connected, the fear of exposure that makes a person camera-shy, the strange connection that leads a man to a ladder, the shifts in reality that mean curtains for Nat Crumley, the anxiety that a new homeowner may feel when he senses growing things, the border between shadow and self in imagining things, and more are handled with the deft, mordant magic worthy of an Ambrose Bierce or L.P. Hartley, while They Don't Write 'Em Like This Anymore acts as a bittersweet epilogue. Now, to read that little tiny print in there, I had to put on some readers. I don't have my actual glasses down here. But yeah, that aside, it is printed in a much nicer, easier to read font, so I will be fine. I really enjoyed that they point out that the title is exactly what it is not, Reassuring Tales. And reassured is exactly how I did not feel reading Dark Gods on a city bus when I first picked it up downtown North Bay, Ontario, and taking the crummy, rickety city bus back to the end of town and the edge of town to get a rickety cab from a stinky cab driver back to my boondock, middle of nowhere home. And yeah, that's about an hour and a half journey, really, all told. So yeah, this was exactly how I did not feel reassured. And I enjoyed every second of it and couldn't wait to devour this book that summer, which is exactly what I proceeded to do that whole weekend, and read this too quickly. So I'll have to reread Dark Gods because it's been a really long time. I don't believe I have a copy of The Ceremonies, which I'll have to rectify. Maybe that'll be the next book I buy. Quite honestly, the only book that I've been interested in picking up lately is a memoir from the actor Michael Berryman. You may recall him from the film The Hills Have Eyes, among a lot of other films. Really cool guy, and I think his memoir is called It's All Good. So yeah, I just had a lot of e-reading to do, and I think that kind of taps me out a little, and it's nice not buying a lot of books and reading what I own from the Backwards bookshelf. So I know I talked about a few new releases, especially the Ronal Malfi book, which a lot of people are very excited about. Have you read it? Let me know what you thought in the comments below, or any of these books, of course, if anything caught your eye. And also, let me know what you think I ought to be reading. Thank you very much for watching, and have an ooky, spooky day.